Hello and welcome to Nonprofit Online Podcast. I'm David Higgins. I am so excited about our guests we're going to be having today, and I know you are going to be absolutely thrilled to be able to hear. I have never said this before in a podcast, but you may want to take out a pen and paper and take some notes because there's going to be an opportunity to learn and to grow. And we're speaking to probably one of the in today's era, one of the greatest influences in modern leadership among nonprofit and NCO leadership and CEOs. So I think you will really enjoy the conversation today. The podcast today is brought to us by Demystifying Fundraising Funnels. It's an amazing book, and this particular book is focusing directly on how to bring your nonprofit online with digital marketing and fundraising. It's a digital marketing blueprint to fund your nonprofit. And in today's day and age, when it's very difficult to do our tactile fundraising that we've done for generations past, it is important to take our fundraising online. And if we cannot, we'll end up not understanding how to connect with not just the millennial generation, which is right now, by mass, the greatest givers that we have in America. We also have the inability to communicate our vision in a way that people are listening today. So I encourage you to get that book and enjoy it. And please contact us with any thoughts that you have, any questions you may have. We would love to brainstorm them with you. Well, today's podcast is incredible, and I am so excited. As a leader and as an influencer of your nonprofit in your community, you have the opportunity today to learn from one of the nation's leading coaches, consultants, and builders of nonprofit leaders. For over 30 years, he has pushed for quality in nonprofit and philanthropic leadership. As a consultant, as an executive search consultant, I almost got tripped over my tongue there just a moment, as a management consultant and coach. He helps with compensation. He's a compensation expert specializing in executive compensation for nonprofits, including negotiating individuals' contracts and with boards. University professor and founder of Center for Nonprofit and Philanthropic Leadership at Rutgers Business School. And by the way, side note, I got to go to Rutgers in high school and run in a track meet there. That was very exciting. That's my only time I've been to Rutgers, and they had to carry me out of the stadium. I ran too hard. His international nonprofit experience includes building nonprofit search practices for 3 firms and presently managed a nonprofit practice for one of the top 5 executive search firms in the United States as well as internationally. He is the managing director of the nonprofit practice at DHR International and co-director of the Center for Nonprofit and Philanthropic Leadership at Rutgers University. Let's welcome James Abruzzo to Nonprofit Online Podcast. James, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. I'm pleased to be here.
I hope you can hear the applause and the cheers from the crowd as I got done with that.
I'm imagining it as you speak. Yeah.
Excellent. That was quite a mouthful. Not all my introductions are that long, but you've been very busy over the last years.
I have. Even though we have been locked down and quarantining and mostly working from home, I have been quite busy teaching, running the nonprofit search practice, running the nonprofit leadership consulting practice for DHR Global, and also with private and public clients working on compensation, executive search, succession planning, all of these things that seem to be coming together as employment, people's attitudes about work, sustainability for nonprofits are all under tremendous change.
You know that I know I'm coming off a little bit off the notes here, but succession planning is so vitally important. My father, who was a nonprofit founder, he founded over 750 independent nonprofits worldwide, orphanages and schools and other areas of nonprofit practice from India through the United States and Europe. And when he passed away at 81, his organization had never put together a succession plan. And as a result, it was a very difficult few years following that. So
No.
I can only imagine you have some pretty wonderful stories as well as horror stories in that regard.
Well, David, since 1990, so over 30 years ago, I have been polling associations, the American Symphony Orchestra League, the British Orchestra League, the American Museum Association, recently the Science Centers in the United States and Canada, and others. And what we have found is fairly consistent. About 80% of the organizations, when you talk to the CEO and the chairman, say succession planning is either important or very important. And less than 20% of these organizations have engaged in succession planning. And we are at a time when a whole generation of leaders in the nonprofit across the sectors is retiring or is being forced to leave for health reasons or is just burnt out. And
Mhm.
our clients and clients who call us are desperate now for some kind of plan to replace their CEO. So I would agree with you. Succession planning, particularly, it sounds like your father was a founder of nonprofits, and moving from the founder to that next generation is probably the trickiest and the toughest thing to do.
No, it is. And I find that finding a coach to help in that regard can be incredibly important. For over 20 years, you've been leading, helping, coaching with DHR International, specifically in the consulting side. It must have been an incredible journey. And I'm going to ask you, I know this might be unprofessional to ask, but can you name drop some of the organizations you've worked with in those years?
Of course, of course. And, my work goes across sectors within the nonprofit. So I'll give you just and it is international. So the Minister of Culture of Berlin was a client, the American University in Paris, closer to home, Bill T. Jones Dance Company, Brooklyn Academy of Music. We do work with disease organizations like the National Hemophilia Foundation, with BIPOC organizations, the August Wilson Center in Pittsburgh. Um, and something that people, unless they are in the field, don't know is that I've probably done more searches for zoos and aquariums than anyone else in this country. Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Naples, San Antonio, Sacramento, National Aquarium, Baltimore, Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, you name it, I'm the zoo guy.
You must know your animals real well.
I actually don't, but what I do know is how boards and CEOs interact, work together, and what the next generation of zoos are looking for. I'm also very pleased and proud to be able to work with United Ways across the country, like St. Louis and Louisville and Omaha,
Mhm.
United Negro College Fund, um, other foundations for which I do a great deal of compensation work as well. Yeah,
Wonderful.
great.
Well, your journey has started off when you graduated from Brooklyn College. I don't want to say the year. Am I allowed to say the year?
Sure.
1971. Now, here's the hard thing. I was born in 1970, and my children think that I've done my dash, so I've got to tell them they're wrong. Your life wasn't mapped out for you when that happened. When did you know when you were being drawn into forming leaders, launching careers within the nonprofit sector? What was that pull for you?
Well, I had started my life and my training um, as a pianist, as a serious classical pianist. I have 2 degrees in music. I still practice the piano every day or every chance I get. And so by the time I was in my late 20s and married and children and trying to make it as a professional concert pianist and conductor, and the exigencies of living and making a living, etc. And I happened to wander into an executive search firm looking for work as an arts manager. I had also gotten a degree, one of the first arts management graduate degrees. So I walked into this firm really desperate for work. I was offered a job there, and I was also offered an audition to conduct the road tour of a chorus line. It was
How
a
interesting.
wonderful time. I didn't get the chorus line gig. I got the job with the search firm. And that's how life happens. And so that was almost 40 years ago. And I have been consistently and contiguously doing executive search for arts and nonprofit organizations all that time. Yeah.
Fantastic. Wow. I was born on a piano.
Oh,
It's
really?
my piano that I was given by my father when I was 13. It's a stand-up Wurlitzer. Um, has traveled with me wherever I went. And my wife, sometimes I'll be playing late at night after a stressful day. Piano's kind of like my meditation. I kind of like disappear into it.
Uh-huh.
And Michelle will say, "Leave your mistress and come to bed." And so, luckily, the only thing she has to be jealous of is that piano. So we're doing
There
all
we
right.
go. There we go.
Excellent. So you're also, with all that you're doing, the trustee of the Alvin Alley Dance Theater. And so I just want to ask you for fun: do you have any hidden moves? Do you dance as well?
No, that I don't dance. I dance like a conductor, which means I have good moves on the podium. But I've always been fascinated and very interested in dance, contemporary dance, and ballet. And so my relationship with LE started because I'd just been named the head of the nonprofit division for A.T. Kearney in New York. And I
Mhm.
wanted to do something to build our brand. And so I approached first the School of American Ballet and then Alvin Ailey and said, look, we are a powerful consulting firm. We want to do a project for you for free. And we don't want anything. We just want
Mhm.
to do it. We just want to give something to the community. We did a lovely project for them. And then I was asked to join the board. Now I'm no longer on the board. I was on the board for almost 18 years. I serve on the board of the Saul Steinberg Foundation, and I have served on a number, almost a dozen nonprofit arts and cultural boards, including the global board of the Netherlands Dance Theater in The Hague.
Wow.
But I don't
Being
dance.
there, oh, I've been to that city one time in my life. I was going over to work with a nonprofit in the Ukraine and ended up staying there overnight as a
Yeah,
flyover, and a beautiful city.
it's a beautiful city. We have an office in Amsterdam, and between Berlin and Amsterdam and Milan, I spend a good deal of time. I have spent a good deal of time in Europe, in Northern Europe.
Well, if you're ever needing somebody to carry your bags, I'm more than happy to go with you. So,
You got it.
well, in 1992, you co-authored a book called Jobs in Art and Media Management. And so much has changed since the 90s in what we're doing, especially in the last 10 years. There's been such a vast change of the entire scope of marketing and media. How has the environment, from your perspective, the landscape changed as you look at 2022?
Well, it's a couple of questions there. One, how has it changed since 1992? The book was originally published in 85, and then there
Wow.
were two more publications, two more editions of it. So the last one was in 92. At that time, arts management as a profession was really not established. There were a few graduate schools in arts management. There
Hmm.
were very few schools of nonprofit, graduate schools of nonprofit management. And today, of course, they proliferate nonprofit management graduate schools, et cetera. I think that, it was a progression. I think later on we'll talk a little about sustainability and how most nonprofits, culturals, and others are obsessed, as they should be, with sustainability. There's never enough money, that kind of thing. Uh, of course, I believe that great arts organizations, great nonprofits are much broader than the sustainability. But so and that today during the pandemic, sustainability has really reared its ugly head. It's on everyone's mind. So what's changed in that regard? Not much. What has definitely changed are a few things. And I tend every 10 years I write a forecast for the decade. I wrote one in 2020. I published it in February, and of course, the world changed in March of 2020.
Yes, it
The
did.
few things that I noted, I think, remain. One, um, cultural and nonprofit and liberal institutions are under attack. They're under attack from fascistic or autocratic institutions around the world. That's one thing. They're under attack from governments who are feeling that they should not be supported. Now, Europe is slightly different, but in the United States, that's certainly the case. I would say that what has changed is that the recognition for a nonprofit leader has changed. They have much more respect. They are joining corporate boards. They are changing the lives of people and being recognized for that. So, in some ways, in a broad way, the institutions, our liberal nonprofit institutions, are under attack from the outside. And at the same time, the great leaders are stepping forward, right?
Absolutely. Um, Before, when I graduated high school, my first dream was to be a history professor. I loved history, partly
Uh-huh.
because it's the only subject I didn't have to study for in high school to get A's. So that was maybe a laziness factor, but I was fascinated by history. And one of the things I noticed early on, and a lot of this was put into me by those that I was in an orchestra in my teen years, and I was the youngest in the orchestra. They're all pretty much adults around me. And they would keep speaking that where there is freedom of art, there's freedom of thought. And that's the reason why historically, when you mentioned fascism, when that nationalist fascist mentality starts to encroach on the art, it's because they're trying to control the freedom of thought. And
Right.
it's so true. Yeah,
It's very true. And this whole moral, ethical issue uh, that is that is on the minds of boards of nonprofits across the world. The whole issue of professional ethics in nonprofit arts and in general. Those are things that, because of the strain, the external strain, are really becoming brittle. They're under pressure, and you see a great deal of turnover and turmoil among the leaders who are not up to that task.
you said something in a previous interview that I really enjoyed. You said great art leaders are defined by the organizations they shape. And then you went on to say there are six components of being a great leader. And I thought it was incredibly challenging. And I wrote those things down. And at the beginning of this conversation, I suggested to people make sure you have a pen and paper ready. And this is one of the reasons why, because I found that these not only were encouraging for me, but they're also challenging. And do you mind if I break down these thoughts you have one at a time?
Not at all. And let me just put in a plug that there is a podcast called The Search for Arts Leadership, a 9-part podcast that I put together last summer that I would, you know, ask your listeners to check with if it's on Audible and Spotify, etc. But yeah, let's dig into this. Yeah,
Hmm.
sure.
Absolutely. Yes, I actually got a chance to listen to the search on Audible in my preparation for our conversation.
Oh, good.
And I do recommend it. It's easy to find. Just go to Audible if you have an Audible account and you type in your name or the search, and it comes right up. And
Search for
it's,
Arts Leadership. Right.
yeah.
Yep.
So the first one of your six components you talk about that a leader needs to have within themselves is sustainability. And what organizations do you champion for this sustainability? Obviously, it comes from the top down, it really comes from the leadership. But sustainability, how important do you see that in the movement of a leader and his nonprofit?
Well, first of all, it is fundamental. It is the underpinning, because what we mean by this is that the institution has the capacity to continue, right? And we all know that some nonprofit institutions fail, go out of business, or are so poor that they can't make the investments that they can make. So
Yeah.
if we think
For the
about
one generation.
right, if we think about what are great institutions, one component must be that they are sustainable, that they have enough funding, financial, etc. So that's the fundamental. It's what Bowen and Bowman wrote about in 1967. It's what graduate schools and nonprofit management have been obsessed with. How do we have an endowment? How do we have a positive cash flow? Things like that. But a rich organization is not necessarily a great organization. And that's my point. My point is that there are five other components that are required to define. I often ask my graduate students, what makes a great organization? What makes a great arts organization? What makes a great nonprofit? Ponder it, and let's pursue it. So the first one is sustainability. Done. But sustainability alone, rich alone, doesn't cut it.
Absolutely. Number two of the six components of being a great leader you mentioned is ethics. And in this day and this age, even the definition of ethics is being challenged. How do you define ethics and what symptoms of it you seek in the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, well, there are, of course, the personal ethics, right? There are the being true to yourself, to your community. I believe that nonprofit organizations are liberal organizations in that they believe in the general good, right? They believe in the general good, that they are disinterested. They're not only interested in themselves, but outside of themselves. And leaders are challenged every day. They're challenged with DEI, being fair to employees. They're challenged with the difference between having power and distributing that power. And of course, there are so many other things. I mean, we expect our nonprofits to be truthful to us. Think about that, right? We expect that. We
That's
don't
right.
expect that from, I don't know, Hershey's. We don't expect that. But we expect that the Red Cross, which has had many, many ethical challenges, is going to be using our donations fairly and ethically and equitably and not enriching themselves. We know
Mhm.
that over the years that has been the case. So that's ethics broadly written, right?
I was having a conversation earlier this week with our podcast with Stephen Baudouin of the Washington Chorus. And I was talking to him about specifically this issue. And I kept noticing something he was doing through the entire 45-minute conversation. As he kept on, I'd say, so what you're doing on social media is incredible. And he'd say, Trevor is an amazing employee. And he kept on building up his team around him and not taking on false credit for even what was obviously just something doing well with the Washington Chorus. And by the end of the interview, I said, are there anybody on your staff you haven't mentioned yet? He starts laughing. He goes, hold on, I'm in trouble now. I've got to think this through. And a great example of one of these leaders that we're talking about here. The third component of being a great leader is accessibility. Now, the arts world is led by those with a melancholy personality, brilliant creative leaders, but closed off in their public face. How does an introverted leader overcome this inaccessibility?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, and these six are always in interplay with each other, right? So
Mhm.
if you have let's talk about the arts. If you have a very popular offering, the sustainability part of you would be to say, let's raise our ticket prices, let's maximize our income. That's just good business. But what happens when we raise our ticket prices? We exclude a certain segment of the population. Also, arts institutions, even many nonprofit institutions, are institutions, and they tend to alienate both by their physical presence, by the messaging, by their cost structure, by the composition of their boards, like rich white people, tend to be exclusionary. And so the idea that to be accessible is to be accessible, to bring people in, and to demonstrate an accessibility, a generosity outside into the world.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
The fourth component of being a great leader, you say, is relevance. What are the keys of being able to maintain relevance as a leader and influence in 2022?
Yeah. So you need to understand the world around you, right? You need to be flexible. You need to, and I'm not suggesting that we change our mission. I'm
Mm,
suggesting that our purpose is clear, but the way in which we enact that purpose must be flexible. We need to, for example, maybe a bit controversial, if we have an endowment, which is an endowment for the future,
yeah,
but we are seeing our community suffering, maybe we need to take some of that endowment and use it today, not in the future. It's about messaging, it's about understanding what the issues are. If an arts institution, for example, only is located in a northern industrial city, Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh, right? And their offering is only of 19th century Italian composers. They are not being relevant to their community,
that's
right?
right. Mhm.
That idea of programming being relevant to your community.
Wow, this is good. Number five, the fifth component of being a great leader is creativity. And the
Yeah.
fear of many leaders in the arts when they hit their 40s and 50s is not only burnout, but also just not keeping up with the trends. We become chasers of the creative mindset. And instead of being creative ourselves, we're just trying to copy the cutting edge in creativity. How do we get back to our roots and reignite the creativity in ourselves as a leader?
Well, in ourselves, challenging, and I think that the way we separate the great ones from the ordinary ones is it's that they who are creative, it's almost self-referential. They are always seeking something new. One of the paradigms, the difference between a leader and a manager is that a manager seeks order. A leader, in some ways, seeks chaos. A leader
Mhm.
seeks a, a, a different way of doing things, a challenge of the ordinary. That difference. Now, of course, you need a manager to hold you down, manage the books, but the institutions, the leaders who exhibit this kind of creativity, who also exhibit the kind of reaching out to creative people to engage them. That means giving them the birth, giving them the freedom to operate within your organization, right? As a kind of a emotional intelligence, I think.
For about 3.5 years, I got a chance to run alongside of a business called Oxford HIM. And one of the things I always used to say is don't be afraid of chaos because there's always growth in chaos. And just what you were saying just now, with a nonprofit, when something is going wrong in the community around us, it allows us to stand up. And in that standing up in that chaos, become more noticed. And when somebody's being noticed, that's when the support also can come. So in this day and age where there's been so much chaos in the last 2 years, there is for the entrepreneurially minded nonprofit leader the ability to step up into something brand new where many other years where things are quiet and mundane, we don't get those opportunities.
I would agree with you. It's very well put. Very well put.
The sixth component of being a great leader, our final one, you talk about being humanity. It's the nature and foundation of nonprofit mission to love and to love humanity. What tries to steal this away from us as organizations and leaders?
Well, let me just step back for one moment and say
Sure.
that as we have talked about this, we've had S for sustainability, ethics, E rather, A for access, R for relevance, C for creativity. And as I was putting together this podcast, my sense is that the great leaders, of course, they want to be accessible and ethical and sustainable, but their purpose, their goal, their raison d'etre is to change the world,
Mm,
is to think about their institution as an agent of change or changing how people think about the world.
that's
And so,
beautiful.
as I thought about this, and as I was looking for an acronym, and as for almost 40 years I have been a search consultant, I realized that the H is really humanity. It's really about thinking about humanity, thinking about changing people's minds, how they think about the world, how they think about each other, how they think about themselves. There's nothing more powerful, nothing more life changing than going to a play, right? You can read a thesis about the history of America, but if you go to see Hamilton, your life, your view of our history, of American history, has been changed, right? And so we see this in poetry, we see this in novels, we see this in looking at a painting. It changes how we think about the world. And it is the arts leader in this case who is the conduit between the artist and the public. And this idea, this initiative, this driving force is this, what I call humanity, is change the world. And God knows we need lots of changing.
Yes.
That's
No, we
it.
do.
SEARCH, the six
Beautiful.
components, six
You know,
components.
um, I have. You're familiar with Zig Ziglar,
Yep.
and the work he did over many many years. His publication company is the one that got a hold of my first manuscript for demystifying fundraising funnels, and they grabbed it and they've ran with it and done a great job getting that book ready for the market. And they're already starting to tell me, all right, you need to start gathering material for your next book. This is dynamic and giving you complete credit for it. Do you mind if I use search in that next book as one of the things I speak about?
Well, in that I am writing the book, Search for Arts Leadership.
Oh, wow. Okay.
On the
You
other
mean I got to
hand,
buy your book now? That's what it means.
I think that this paradigm, you can't
Yeah.
copyright a paradigm.
No.
And I welcome you to pursue it, explore it. It's the kind of thing that I talk about with my graduate students around the world. It's the way when a board says to me, "Well, what makes a great leader?" I have an answer, right? I
Mhm.
have a very and when I evaluate a potential leader, these are the things I look at. In addition to emotional intelligence and things like that.
Mm,
Yeah.
very good. You often say executive search is a relationship, not a transaction. Can you define that more in depth for me?
Yeah, yeah. First of all, I wrote something called the Ten Commandments of Management Consultant, and the first commandment is usually what the client thinks is the problem is not the problem.
Hmm.
And sometimes, many times, when I'm called in to do a search to replace someone who was either fired or left, it's not just refilling that job that solves the problem, right? I remember doing a zoo search years ago. The zoo was owned by the state. The zoo also had a friends group. They were looking for a president for the zoo. After talking to people, I realized that nobody would be able to be successful in that job unless the friends group and the state organization were on the same page. So I said, wait, let's all get together. Let's have an all day retreat. Let me facilitate it. Let's see where we have the common points of view. I recruited somebody from England who was there for 26 years.
Wow.
Coincidence? Not so. And also because most search consultants are literally doing that transaction, which I do. But also, I can offer strategic planning, compensation consulting, organizational consulting. So I have clients that for whom I've done many searches, comp studies, organizational studies, some strategic planning. I think a decent measure is if you have a client for 10 years, and I'm happy to say I have lots of them, 10 or more years.
Wow. We're surrounded by underpaid quality nonprofit leaders, sometimes because they don't even see the value or because they're in an underfunded nonprofit as a rule. How can they reevaluate their financial worth and then start adjusting accordingly?
Right. Well, this is a very tense and topical issue. I have written a number of pieces for individuals that with titles like "You Won't Get a Raise Unless You Ask for It," or things like that. How to negotiate a better salary. All of that is important. And these days, because people can leave their job and find another one like that, that's something they ought to think about. The other side of it is that nonprofits do have a measure of control from the government in that they're not allowed to pay their CEOs a certain amount of money. And I do a lot of work in that where I demonstrate that what they're being paid is fair and reasonable. And I always have written and thought that if somebody's being paid fair and reasonable and they're not paying their employees fairly, that's up to them, that's on them, and their institution will lose from that. I have changed my mind. I think that a board of directors has a responsibility for the assets of the corporation, but they also have a responsibility to be moral. And part of being moral is equity and fairness.
Hmm,
And
true.
if, there is a steady supply of undergraduates coming in, taking these quasi internship jobs, not being paid enough, can't support themselves, and the CEO is being paid well and fairly, that's a role for the board. The board has to think about that. So I'm saying I've written recently, but I'm saying publicly that this is now a responsibility that the board must take on. The CEO should decide who gets paid what. That's possible. The board should set a standard, a philosophy, a moral standard about how we treat our employees and hold the CEO responsible.
Many of our listeners, board members, nonprofit leaders, upper level leadership, If a nonprofit institution is looking for a proven nonprofit CEO, what are the steps they need to take to connect with DHR Global?
Well, I mean, they should just call me. That would be the first step. We have offices, from Calgary to Milan, not Milan, Calgary to Oman and Australia and Asia and all over. But if it's in the United States, either I or one of my team members would be happy to talk to them, not to sell them business, but to talk to them, to see if spending money on executive search is the right way to go. And if not, what we might be able to help them think through when they're engaging in a search. So,
Somebody,
well, I mean,
if somebody
people
wants to connect with you, do they do it through the internet or?
absolutely, you know, Jay Abruzzo at DHR Global, Jay Abruzzo at Abruzzo Associates. I'm happy to talk to people. I wrote the other day, I woke up early, opened my email and I got a two-page letter from one of my former graduate students saying, you talk about ethics, what about this? And I wrote back to him and I said, what a gift. What a gift to open up an email in the morning to hear from you. Give me some gifts. Send me some gifts.
Excellent. I'm just going to spell this out for those that are listening. It is JABRUZZO at DHR Global
Dot
dot
com.
com, right? Yep,
Right.
dot com. And if you are in a position, don't waste James' time. But if you're in a position where you are looking and inquiring about this subject, please reach out to him. That would be wonderful. Wonderful.
Absolutely. I'm serious about this.
Well, we end every show doing a shout out to a nonprofit we think is doing an exceptional job, James. So I'm going to go ahead and go first,
Yep.
and I'm going to give a shout out to a nonprofit that I've looked at for several years, and I just continually marvel at what they try to accomplish. Impactful Ninja, which is a online blog which has quite depth in nonprofit world and communication. They put together the 9 best charities for international aid. Of course, ones we know very much: Doctors Without Borders, Direct Relief, CARE, Americas, International Response Committee. But they also put MAP International, MAP International. And in 1994, I got to spend some time with MAP International, going in and out of Zambia and South Africa. Their impact and transparency ratings through Charity Navigator gives a rating of 95.58%, and MAP International with 100% for accountability and transparency. This is a very well run organization that accomplishing what their supporters and donors ask them to accomplish, which is the care and nurturing of the weak and those that cannot support themselves. And so they're doing an amazing job. And you can find out more, listeners, at map.org, simple, map.org. And I encourage you just to go reach out to them and encourage them. Even let them know that you heard about them on this podcast. All right, James, it's your turn. Who would you like to give a shout out to?
Well, you had asked me in advance, and so I went back and looked at a blog post that I did when I retired or left the board of the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, because I think it is truly one of the best. While I was on the board, 5 years in advance of Judith Jamison and our executive director retiring, we put together a succession planning committee. The company went from not being able to pay its bills to have a fantastic building and a huge endowment. It travels the world. But I just want to read something, if I could, very short.
Absolutely.
I was privileged to be part of the team of great dancers, artistic directors, staff, and fellow board members who together created a lasting legacy to Mr. Ailey, Alvin Ailey. No company has done more to break color barriers, to demonstrate that gracefulness can be heroic, that athleticism can exist alongside the highest ethical standards, that strong business principles facilitate, not inhibit creativity, that philanthropy is essential to a civil society that revelation and redemption can emerge from the darkest history. That's Alvin Ailey's legacy. The company, being a board member, being a donor, being a pro bono consultant to it for all those years, had a profound effect on me and my wife and our family. And so I'll give it a shout out.
That was beautiful. Thank you
Thank
so much. And I would like to encourage anyone who is curious about them, look them up. And if you feel like you're in a position to support them or give them an encouragement, do so. Find out where they are on Facebook or online, and just give them a thumbs up. Let them know that you are seeing what they are doing. It's always an encouragement to get a pat on the back.
That's
Thank you
great.
so much, James, for being a part of this conversation today.
I can't tell you how pleased and privileged I am to have participated in this. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And for all of you that are working so hard to show kindness and love to your neighborhoods, communities, and states, I want to just tell you how much we appreciate what you are doing. Keep it up. You know, we are an organization that loves to celebrate kindness. And I just want to encourage you to go through your week and look for the smiles, because there are a lot of people smiling back at you. You have a wonderful day. And until we speak again, take care of yourself.